One of the things that you start to understand as a filmmaker, especially new filmmakers, the more you start going down the rabbit hole, is the fact that arguably the single most important decision that you're going to make as a filmmaker, second only to the camera that you're going to film with, is the lens that you choose to pair with it. And the reason why I categorize this as somewhat of a rabbit hole is because the more cameras release certain products, the more research you do going on YouTube, Reddit, looking up lenses, looking up price comparisons. The whole process of trying to figure this stuff out just begins to get daunting after a while. But this year in particular, I chose to make a very unique stylistic choice with the lens that I decided to pair with my cameras. My main camera this year being the FX30. And this bold stylistic choice was not only a gamble for my career as a filmmaker compared to what other filmmakers are doing out there in the market right now, but also has been able to change my entire filmmaking career, as well as my thought process on how I look at cinematography as a whole. That lens we're talking about today is the Helios 44-2 58mm f2. Anybody who's familiar with this lens will also notice that the way I have it isn't typically how you'll see this lens look on most cameras, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now I have a whole separate video that gets real technical on this lens as far as its history and the technical specs of the lens and how I can work with my camera and the cameras that you have as well. And that video will be in the description, but the conversation I'm having today is talking about the lens as far as why I chose to make it my main workhorse with my FX30 and why I chose to use this lens on 95% of the paid gigs that I've done in 2024, as well as being able to establish myself as a filmmaker with my own distinct style. So the first part of it is what actually made me choose this lens. So at the beginning of the year, I had picked up the Sony FX30 to be my A camera for a lot of my paid work. That a lot of my filmmaking choices are based on budget, not completely low budget, but price to performance ratio. And with my yearning to get into the film emulation side of content creation, not only was I looking for a lens to give me a cinematic feel, but I also wanted a lens that allowed me to be different from other creators that were out there, because I've seen a lot of people picking up the Night Stalker lenses from Siri, TT Artisan lenses, just a lot of the popular cine lenses that's out there on the market for Sony cameras and other types of bodies. But I had noticed a cult following online, very small but cult-like following online for these 1960s Soviet vintage photo style lenses. So the first thing I did when I seen this lens is I looked up reviews and comparisons and test footage with this lens paired with the camera that I have compared to other cameras, just really doing a deep dive, getting all the information I could on a lens like this before I made a decision to place it on my camera. And my skepticism of the lens wasn't me being fearful of having the manual focus. I actually prefer manual focus over autofocus. My actual skepticism was knowing that the competitive market I'm in, a lens like this could either make or break my quality as a filmmaker. But it's also one of those situations where my budget range wasn't necessarily in the tier where I could afford a lot of those newer cine lenses that's out there for the FX30. Which gets me to why this particular Helios lens that I have on my camera looks the way that it does. So while I was doing my research on this lens, I came across a lot of videos of creators and camera enthusiasts that were taking this lens and either rehousing it or putting a housing on top of the lens to actually give it more of a modern cinema camera style look. There were many people taking this lens, going inside the internals, declicking the aperture, and there's still people to this day online with eBay stores and actual online stores that take this lens and completely rehouse it into a full cinema housing. Those lenses can get just as expensive as the modern cine lenses that's out there. But then I found a team on eBay that actually take this lens with budget filmmakers in line. They declick the aperture, as well as adding manual focus gears to the aperture wheel and focus wheel. And then they leave it in its original housing to maintain the budget price point. The only catch was the company that was actually making these specific modifications were stationed all the way in Ukraine, which means purchasing the lens would have it sent from Ukraine to a whole different European country in order for it to fly overseas to pass through US customs, which made it about a 2 to 3 week wait time from time of purchase to the time that it showed up at my door. Now see, here's where my lens in particular gets a little interesting. So most people who buy this lens and place it on their camera, they usually convert it to an EF mount, get a Metabose speed booster, and then switch it over to their Sony camera or Panasonic camera or whichever camera they're actually adapting it to. So what I actually chose to do instead of this was get an M42 to NEX adapter, and then on the front angle, in order to give myself a little bit more focal length, I actually put an Altura front angle adapter on the front of the lens, which gives me about a 0.43 times back in focal length. So when you do the math on that, the lens itself is a 58 millimeter. With the 1.5 times crop on the FX30, it makes it about an 87 millimeter. Then with the front angle adapter here, it actually brings it back to a 37.4 millimeter equivalent, about a 40 millimeter equivalent. Stopping this all the way down at f2 introduces a lot of flares and creaminess in the edges of your footage that you don't necessarily want to put in there unless it's a stylistic choice you're trying to make. So f2.8 is pretty much the best f-stop for this lens. A second thing this front angle adapter actually does is it decreases the minimal focus distance on the camera. So when you want to get really close up on a subject or on an item or on an object, a flower or anything else like that, you can get super close on that subject and get an insane depth of field into your shots, especially with a lens like this that does a lot with that creamy bokeh. And like I said before, it's very much a stylistic choice and a risk going with a lens like this, but I can happily say I've used this lens on every single paid gig that I've done this year. There's not a single job that I've done this year, whether it's a music video, a wedding, corporate documentary, anything, that has not seen this lens pointed at a subject at some point during production. As a matter of fact, I shot an entire AAC documentary using this lens with the FX30. Now, like I said, if you're someone who doesn't enjoy doing manual focus, this may not be a lens that you want to pick up. Another thing that I found using this lens is that when you are manual focusing with this lens, you are going to have to eyeball some of your shots, as the focus peaking either in your camera or your monitor will fall short just based off how this lens was made and how soft it is. This is a very soft lens, which depending on the paid gig that you're actually doing might not be what you're looking for, and depending on what type of shooter you are may not be the type of look that you're going for. I know a lot of shooters that really prefer that tack sharp look. I more so look at things from a cinema perspective, and the softer the better to me. Although that's a whole nother topic we can get into a whole nother video. But like I said before, if sharpness is something that is your best friend, you might not want to pick up this lens. Not unless you're pairing it with a camera that already puts out extremely sharp footage and you're wanting to soften that footage up just a little bit, which pretty much applies to my reasoning to putting it with the FX30 as well as other cameras I've used in the past. But I will say this, and this is sort of a unique thought process on this. If you're a filmmaker who's not afraid of making gambles, when it comes to stylistic choices on what you choose to film with, this very well may be the lens that changes your life the same way it changed mine as a filmmaker. And I encourage anybody who has a chance to experiment with this lens, don't be afraid of the imperfections of it. Some of those imperfections might be the very thing that makes your film stand out and be unique. But I absolutely love this lens. I'll never get rid of this lens. This lens will probably follow me with every single camera body that I have from here on out. And any camera that I ever do research on or ever think about picking up, I always research footage of how that camera looks with this lens specifically, because I never want to take this lens off. There's a bunch of videos and links out there telling you where you can pick up specifically a lens like this, so check those out when you get a chance. I'll definitely be talking about this lens more in the future as this channel grows, especially more specifically with the FX30. But with that being said, I want to know your all's experience with this lens. If you've had it before, let's talk about it in the comments. Tell me what you guys have filmed with this lens, how it's worked for you, whether you like it, whether you dislike it. What other sort of lenses do you prefer instead of this lens? And let's get the conversation going, man. I appreciate everybody making it this far. It really helps me put out more content for you guys like this. So if you want to see more, hit that like button. Don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button on your way out. It's enough of me talking, guys. It's been another one from your boy DaVinci HD, reminding you the only reason that piece of art that you want isn't out is because you haven't pressed record. See you guys on set. Peace out.